Mm. Good morning. Let's talk about death. You have probably noticed, if you are on social media in any way, and if you're about the same age as me, that death is kind of a daily thing now. And of course, recently we lost both Jeff Beck and David Crosby. Now, I don't know how much music affects your life, but I'm a musician and I've been tuned into music all my life. And so naturally, they do mean something to me. Um, it varies how much. I noticed something. This is interesting that I thought I'd share with you. I just noticed something. There's a connection between 2016, which is a hell of a year of loss, and 2023. And it goes like this. January 10th of 2016, David Bowie died. And on the 18th, Glenn Frey died of the Eagles. Flash forward to 2023, Jeff Beck died on the 10th, and David Crosby died on the 18th. Does this mean anything? I don't think so. It's a pattern that I noticed, and I thought I would bring up and talk to you about a little bit. But the primary thing is that we have made a tactical error, our generation, and it was imposed upon us, not something that we planned to do. But when you think about how our parents consumed popular music, they liked singers, right? They had singers that they liked. They didn't know who the band members were. They didn't know who the songwriters were or the arrangers or any producers or any of that stuff. But we liked bands. And of course, this started with the Beatles, excuse me, and the whole British invasion. And then as the Beatles matured, we liked the band, the Beatles, and we all had favorites, right? Some people liked Paul, some people liked John, some people liked George. There were Ringo fans. So we had the opportunity to attach to 4 different individual people just in that one band. And because of the British invasion and because of the great popularity of the Beatles, there got to be hundreds of bands. And we liked hundreds of bands, and each one of them had 4 people or 5 people in the band. Some had more than that. So, and as the Beatles matured, they became more and more deep in their lyrics. The lyrics became more in depth, more vulnerable, talking about human emotions in ways that really hadn't been done before. And remember Carole King came out with that thing, Tapestry, and she'd come from the Brill Building where she was writing songs that didn't contain really much emotional depth. And then she started being swept into the singer-songwriter movement. And that the whole thing with that was that you do include the way you feel about life, the way it impacts you. And, there's a real philosophical undercurrent to the whole singer-songwriter thing. And so, and of course, when I was young, I was listening to Motown mostly, but then I can remember where I was. I was in the back of the KFC where I worked. I was age 16, and over the radio came Dr. My Eyes by Jackson Browne, and everything shifted. I realized this is a voice, it sounds like a kid like me, and he's talking about important things in an eloquent sort of way. Here's another complicated human being here. And so I tuned into his music, and of course that led me to a lot of different places, including the Eagles. The Eagles were writing about stuff that mattered. There were the hit songs, but none of it was pap. I mean, when they got into Hotel California, that was showing the underside, the dark underside of the LA fame scene, and drugs and everything else that were coming about by the time that happened. So we attached to people who were saying something to us, and our parents attached to people who were just saying whatever in order to have some lyrics to sing, really. So it's qualitatively entirely different. And so what do we do with all of this? Because there's dozens and dozens of people coming along that we might not be thinking about every day, but when they die, it's going to trigger something in us. I hadn't thought of David Crosby in a long time, but when he died, it triggered in me a memory of a song of his from 1975 when I was in a particularly kind of fearful and isolated part of my life, and this song came in. There's a long story about how I heard the song. That's an interesting story. I wish I had time to tell it right now, but I won't. Um, the song "Carry Me" came into my life all of a sudden, and it was like a lifesaver for me at the moment. "Carry Me Above the World." It's a beautiful song, and I hadn't thought about David Crosby in years, really. I didn't really care about him much. You know, I disagree with him politically. And of course, I went through the phase of thinking I had to dislike anybody who disagreed with me politically. Um, and I'm sort of past that now. And so I dug into that song again and I learned to play it a little bit. And I sang it to myself a bunch of times. And just like Jeff Beck before him, you know, I started digging into Jeff Beck's music a little bit, and it was so emotional that I got swept away in it. And I wasn't of much value to anybody for about a week when Jeff Beck died. And, you know, not so bad when Crosby passed away, but it's going to be like this. There's going to be people that really meant something to me when I was young, are going to die, and it's going to trigger this whole grief thing in me, and I can't spend all the time doing that, my time doing that. Now, I don't know how big your own social networks are, the people who you are in touch with on social media, but it's hundreds for me. And not only that, in my personal life, I know a lot of people in Los Angeles, and some of them I go back a long way with, and it's all through this sort of singer-songwriter music that I play. And so I know them through their songs and through seeing them perform and knowing their struggles. And these people are important to me, and they're all going to be dying in the next few years. Um, I don't accept very many friend requests on Facebook because I just can't be expanding constantly what I do there. How many people I know. There is one guy. There are a number of you who have friend requested me, and one of them is a guy named, and some that I have accepted. One of them is a young guy named Billy Napier, right? And over the years, I've kind of gotten attached to Billy, and I know, and I knew how attached he was to his father, what kind of a relationship they had. Well, his dad died this past week. And so, you know, I'm witnessing Billy going through this really tremendous grief. And you know, I'm going to watch all of my Facebook friends, the people that I care about, going through this type of grief over the next few years. Now, how do you deal with that? How do we cope with this sort of thing if you're having a similar experience? So losing the cultural figures is just one part of it, but losing just people by at large is the greater part of it. But let's just talk about the cultural figures for right now. And because we all have those in common with one another. So when one of them dies, we all kind of have that in common. And I think that as I said earlier, we grew up in a period of time when we were going from just singable words to lyrics that mean something. And we got used to that. And even if you're in the rock side of things, you do have people like, for instance, Neil Peart. Neil Peart, although I wasn't really a Rush fan, he was not only a great drummer, but he wrote all the lyrics. And the lyrics in Rush songs put forth a type of life philosophy, and a lot of people attached to that. And when Peart passed away, I watched people like they were really shook up by it. And I would think that that same thing will happen when Roger Waters dies of Pink Floyd, because he wrote most of the lyrics, and he had the vision of what Pink Floyd was talking about, right? So I didn't really inhabit that. Didn't inhabit my life that much. It was the singer-songwriters that touched me so much. But Roger Waters is a singer-songwriter. He's a songwriter. Neil Peart, though not a singer, he's a songwriter. And so there's that information there. And you attach to it, and it becomes a sort of sort of a guiding light in your life when you're young. You get something, you're learning something from these people that's helpful in your life. So what do we do with all of this? And it seems to me that, you know, when we made the strategic when we made the strategic mistake of attaching to hundreds of rock stars in hundreds of different bands, or maybe thousands of rock stars in hundreds of different bands, we really leaned into something that's going to catch up with us now. So what do we do about it? And so what I think that we need to do about it is we need to isolate those ones. Think about those ones now who are liable to really have some impact on you when they die, whoever that might be. Now, I think if Bob Dylan was to die tomorrow, the country would shut down. At least the culture would shut down for a week or 10 days. There will be mass gatherings in the streets when Bob Dylan dies, because everybody has attached something to Bob Dylan. And so, you know, I think it's probably smart for me to dig into some of his more recent material and see if there's anything else of the Bob Dylan message that I need to get, right? Because he had a lot of effect on me earlier, particularly when I was learning how to write songs and thinking about how to write songs. And, you know, Dylan was, I learned some of his songs, a lot of his songs, and he was making the map for me in that. But also for people who never did pick up a guitar, he was making a life map for them in a different sort of way. So I think that I should probably dig into that. I should probably, you know, flash back to Jackson Browne, who was such a great influence on me earlier, and look at his stuff that he wrote when he was 45, stuff that he wrote when he was 50, stuff that he wrote when he was 60. I haven't really dug into those albums. So look at some of that thing, get the rest of the message. That would be part one of the strategy that I'm imagining. And part two would be to connect most of my interest to younger people, whether they be entertainers or not, to younger people in general. Start caring more about people who are young rather than just hanging around with people my own age. Now, I am doing this already. You know, I'm hosting the open mic at Kulak's Woodshed pretty frequently, and I'm meeting all these young people who are wonderful. They're super smart, they're kind-hearted people, and they're really talented songwriters. So I'm connecting to these people. Cordelia Watson is one of them, and I don't know how old Cordelia is, 25. But you know, I have real conversations with her, and you know, she opened for our band recently, and maybe I'll post her concert on the channel. But she's fantastic, and you know, I had Paula Fong in my band for 18 months, and so I was influenced by the concerns that are in her life now as a young mother with 3 young children, the way she's juggling all of that around, trying to find a way to fit her creative life into the life of being a mother and a wife to a husband she loves. You know, I had to think about all those things. When I was with her, it wasn't just 2 people sitting around talking about their ailments like it might be when I hang out with my friend Jackie, who's, you know, basically my age and you know, laid up with a injured knee at the moment, you know what I mean? So I don't want to just be in that world where all of my friends are my age and soon they will die, and soon I will die and leave a big hole in their lives, you know? So I want to hang around with people who will not die before I do. I know it sounds like I'm you know, coming up with a trick or something like that. But it's really for many years I've been thinking about how I'm going to cope with becoming an older man. And it just seems obvious to me that the way to do that and stay relevant is to go from, being a whatever sort of ambitious guy that I was, and mellow out, and then aid people who are more in their ambitious years, who are learning new things and doing stuff like that. I'm not saying this very well, but go from being, say, a mover and a shaker of some sort to being an elder. And so now I am an elder in the Los Angeles singer-songwriter community. And by going and hosting the open mic at Kulak's Woodshed on Monday nights, I meet so many people, because that's a place where ambitious young singer-songwriters who are trying to find their voice, they show up there for some reason. It's just always been a sort of beacon for people like that. And just be available to them and be of some service to them. And that way I'm still relevant. I'm still part of the craft and art that I love and that I'm good at, without being lapsing into some sort of bitterness that I never made it. That's long gone. I mean, guys my age do not get record contracts, and guys do in their 40s and 50s do not either. So I let go of that a long time ago, but it's still a part of my life. So to be passing on what I've learned, then it completes the circuit, and then I have been here growing up and learning stuff from Jackson Browne and Bob Dylan and Springsteen for a while, and people like that I really learned things from, and were somewhat my musical philosophers. And now I am that for others, in a sense. And we talk about the soundtrack of our lives. Well, certainly the Eagles were a soundtrack in my life for years. And so Glenn Frey was meaningful to me in that way. And so we talk about the soundtrack of our lives. Well, I actually wrote the soundtrack to my own life once I was in my 20s, right? And of course, then, the meaningfulness of Jackson Browne and the people that set the way for me, Joni Mitchell, people who had made me interested in that art form, I listened to them less frequently and was making my own music, So once I got into my 20s, probably by the time I got to be about 30 and my songs started really being pretty good, now I have songs that I wrote that describe life in your 30s, life in your 40s. Oh, what's it like to be a 50-year-old? What's it like to be a guy divorced and living alone at 60? I have these songs. I wrote them. They are the soundtrack for my own life. So in some way, I like, now I find myself with these younger people pulling out these old songs that don't describe my life anymore, but did describe my life when I was their age, So I pull these things out once in a while, and I throw them out there, and young people, they go, wow, that's really good, because they're hearing the message in there that is sort of distinct to that time of life. And so I guess all I'm trying to say here is we've got to develop some sort of strategy, because you don't really know who's going to die next week or next month, who was part of your development as a human being. And, of course, I'm talking about music mainly for me, but whatever your walk of life, there are going to be people you're going to be losing. So in some way, you're going to have to get your brain around, what is it that you learned from them? What is still to learn from them while they're still around? So that when the moment comes, you can mourn them properly, but not feel, like you've been gut punched. Because if you feel that way, that's going to be an everyday thing, unless you do one of two things, unless you just turn off to the news entirely and say, I don't want to know, or you numb yourself to it. You steel yourself to it and say, I don't care. And then just, go inside yourself. And that's no way to be. So anyway, that's all I got to say. It's very strange that that we had that little, the January of 2016 was so similar to January of 2023 in that way, but I don't expect that that means anything. It's just always going to be this way, and there are more and more and more people. I mean, Dylan is 81, 82, something like that. Paul McCartney is 81 or 82, and Roger Waters will be 80 soon. And it's not going to go in any other direction. We're going to lose all of our guiding cultural lights over the next several years, and there's going to be a goddamn lot of them. Ones we're not even thinking of now. Bands that really took us through a particular period in our lives are really going to come storming back to us when one of them dies, and we're going to all unprocessed stuff is going to come up, and we're going to go, wow, I hadn't thought about them in a long time. Oh, that band was so important to me then. And we're going to dig in. And now all of those old songs, we'll be watching old tapes of them, on YouTube and all of that stuff. And it's going to be painful. So I hope you'll do like I do and start transferring from the person that was affected to the person who is having an effect, and look for younger people that you can pass on what wisdom you have. And I don't mean being preachy. I don't mean going around and telling people what to do, or walking into a room and expecting people to sit at your knee waiting for your wisdom. I mean, it's not at all like that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's being available when people want to learn something from you, whatever your walk of life is, whatever your skill set is that you are so much better at now than when you were young. Look for somebody at your job site or something. I know some of you are retired like I am now, but lock into that. Let your old age be one of transferring the knowledge of an older person to the people who are in need of that information. If you could save some people from making some bad steps, you'd be doing a service. And if you can give them a little information when they most need it, that'll help them for their path to be easier. Again, you're doing a service, and hey, life is all about service, isn't it? So anyway, I just wanted to talk about death with you a little bit. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.